Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. Now, the brother shall betray the brother unto death, father the son, and children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But he that endures to the end, the same shall be saved. And when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the place where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let him that be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let not him that is on the housetop go down into the house, neither enter therein, neither take anything from the house. Let not him that is in the field return to take his garment. And woe unto them that be with child in those days, and those that give suck. And pray that your flight be not in the winter. So here we have a continuation of the warnings. We just see where they asked him, what shall be the signs of these things and of thy coming? After, leaving the temple, and they pointed out to him, it was one of the disciples, Master, see us, what manner of stones and what great buildings are here. Then he started to give them the breakdown. There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Then when he sat down, they came and asked him for the signs. He said, take heed lest no man deceive you. Many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ. Wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, troubles. You'll be beaten in the synagogue. And, he listed a whole bunch of things. And this is the continuation. Because, really, he's giving them, I said yesterday that God, he lives in all moments of time at the same time. He lives in the past, he lives in the present, God, he lives in the future, and he lives in all these things at the same time. Time is not, what it is to us, it's not the same to him. So, when he tells us these things, he's giving us, like real time feedback. It's like a more of an observation than an opinion. It's like looking through a security camera. If you ever had a job where you had to look at security cameras, or maybe you have one at your home, or even a front door camera, those are popular these days. You can look through it and you can see who's at the door. It's like him looking through his security camera, telling us what he's seeing. In this we really see like a turn of events. Down a real dark path. We see betrayal. We see fear for your life. We see being hated. These things are not easy to bear. When we come to the kingdom of God, we don't understand that, we come being picked on to be picked on. And we have a huge target on our backs. So, we're now an enemy of the devil. So remember, he's going to hell and there's no hope for him. So this thing, it speaks of betrayal. Just how men's heart would be. Loyalty, being a big thing. It's really a decline in morality. What is morality? Morality is that thing that tells you that, well, there's a little, baby over there, an infant, and he has a lollipop, a sucker, they call it in America. Morality says I don't just go and take it from him because I'm an adult and I'm way bigger and there's nothing he can do. Morality says, look, it's a little baby, it's a child. He just came into this world, he doesn't know anything. You know, rejoice in his innocence. See parts of yourself in him. Be reflective and appreciative of something like this when you see it in life. Is giving respect unto life and honor. These things they meant a lot in the old days, but with the decline in morality, not only will he have someone taking that lollipop away from him, he all he can do is cry. Nothing he can do. But we'll have even adults doing even worse things to him. People could be trusted in the past, but now it's like when you look on the news and you see things happening. Anything is possible. You see this person go and they'll shoot, up a certain place, public place. You'll see people being kidnapped, even little children being sold, to pay debts. Yeah, I saw this. Well, she was 4 years old that was sold to this dude, ready to take her as wife, over a family debt. It wasn't more than 500 American. Morality really is supposed to protect the people. Morality is kind of the things that, we're not going to go pass laws for every single thing, for every single human action in the world. But we're going to cover the biggest ones, basic. But some of them, we're just hoping that people would abide by these. Just out of respect. It's not, official law, but, things that are frowned upon, is one category. So we see a story of betrayal here. The brother betraying the brother to death. What does it take, to betray a brother unto death? There's something that you're trying to gain. Is either something that you're trying to gain, or you're against something that he believes, or you identify with a certain group of people that he does not, and he's considered even an enemy. Now, this is literally, brothers and sisters, because it does mention father and son. But, the brother is just your everyday man. The people in your community, the people in your city, in your town, in your country, the people of your nationality or even race, betraying the brother to death. I almost want to say that if a brother's to be coming from, somewhere so far, and, they've been through so many things together, that, you would think that there would be a bottom line. There would be all right, so we're each trying to get the best that we can for our own selves. We're each trying to fulfill our own lives and live that to the fullest. And we'll go through great extents and great lengths to get what we want or what we think we deserve. And we might even pose each other. We might even be competing for the same things at a certain point. But we understand that we're only trying to make our lives better. That's the key, I think, I'm searching for. We're only trying to make our lives better. But we lose sight of this to the point where, a situation can arise. And I think that, well, my brother's life being traded for this thing, something I'm okay with. Remember, we started out only wanting to make each other's lives better. So then you think that anything that would be of this seriousness would be able to say, well, because remember, the end point was the starting point rather was trying to make each other's lives better. So if we're going to cross this line and this boundary, what are we really saying? That we lost the point of why we started. We lost the point of who we are, morality. We've lost all of that. Honor is so important. And it's one of those things that are lost in this, today's society. What is honor? I saw this, article about this lady. She was a OnlyFans model, and it was her goal to, have intercourse with, I think it was 2,000 men in one day, 24 hours, 2,000 men. We seeing this as nothing. The men that will sign up to be a part of this. Now, mind you, she was, physically attractive enough. But, where's morality? Where's honor? Where is, I refuse to let somebody with even this kind of mind, touch me. I don't care what they look like. I don't care what's going on. I don't care if I'm getting paid. I don't care if there's, fame and publicity for it. I don't care of anything that it might bring to me. The brother betraying the brother unto death. We've lost sight of the bottom line. And we've now crossed over into something where if we realize just how, dishonorable and despicable and disgusting this thing is, we would want no part of it. But morality, it covers really those non-tangible things. Almost I want to say that, if you were to break it or not, I mean, who would care? It's your life. You can do whatever you want. So the father, the son, and the children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. You brought your son into this world. He's your child. Remember, he's carrying on your legacy. When you're gone, he's going to be you walking this earth. I came to the realization one day that, if he does anything, good or bad, they're going to say that's your son. They say that it was John that is the father. They're going to say, look, there goes John's son. Man, he's such a honor roll student. He graduated college so early, 19. Most people don't even, barely starting college at 19. He's working for NASA. He's doing all these great things. Or they're going to say, well, he's a drunkard. John's son, the drunkard. John's son, the town fool. John's son, criminal. This is your legacy. This is your heritage, your posterity. Remember, a lot of times they're going to refer to him as your name. It's a part of yourself that you're, letting down. So the father betraying the son. There was a time when they were so young, all they could do is sit there while you changed their diaper. I know in these days in Jerusalem, they had, the cloth diapers. We call them nappy. Nappy. You literally had to feed them. You didn't feed them, they didn't eat. Like whether it be breastfeeding or whatever, food they would be able to feed the babies, I know in this, day and age, we have, all these, commercial things, on your supermarket shelves. But, at what point did he get enough that, all right, so I couldn't do it when he was just born, when he could barely roll over, I couldn't betray him to death then. He could crawl on his knees, walk around the house. I couldn't do it to him then. When he stood and he took his first steps, I was so happy to see him walk. Sure, I surely wouldn't do it then. At what point did it, come enough that we say, well, okay, all right, now he is, his own person and he's responsible for himself. And I view him as a completely other person to the point where I can, invade, his right to freedom and life. And I'm okay with taking, or allowing his life to be taken. What does, it's really communicating a sense of morality. The father betraying the son unto death. I see, materialism is really one of the greatest things. You wanting something, you're feeling that they're standing in the way. At this point, we've become like the animals. What separates us from them? Penguins, they mate for life. They are monogamous. So they have at least some sense of morality. But if you look at dogs, they'll just, lie with whoever is in their, vicinity. Where's the thing in our mind that's supposed to be, chipping in and being turned on and, communicating to us, like, hey, alert. This is not something that we believe in. This is not something that we should be doing. It's like that part of our brain has gone missing. Children rising up against their parents, causing them to be put to death. It's the us versus them theory. Showing us that this thing is malfunctioning somehow because your parents and your children, they're supposed to be in the us group, versus them. unless you've gone on and you've married a wife or a husband, whether you're male or female, and you now have a new us, versus them. But it seems as if randomness is behind all of this. Just having a random identity, random thoughts. Because, what's going through the mind of, someone that puts their parents to death? You see, at some point, something entered, a belief entered into their mind. And you could ask, where did this come from? It took root and it's now who they are. And it seemed as if there was an interruption in their life progression of them, like I said, being born a baby, growing up, walking their entire life. It's as if some point they were removed from that road or that street, and they were, just dropped off in a completely different, I would even say, not only neighborhood or city, but even a different country. And they're now walking on this completely road where, how did we make the transition from there onto this? And now, I mean, we're allowed to have disagreements, right? Not everybody has the same mind. God, in His wisdom in making this world be able to sustain itself, He gave so many of us different, ideals, different beliefs, different things that we value, but ultimately all for the good of ourselves and mankind. So now here we have this, children, being okay with their parents, being put to death. And you can see that this is a huge, ego battle, really. Because like I said, we disagree up to a certain point. But we understand, the bottom line, that when things get too heated, it's time for us to take a break. Our differences shouldn't be that important where it pushes us over the edge for us to say, you know what, they either have believed something that I don't, or they have done something I don't agree with, or they're living their lives a certain way. Or even worse, they had the Corban, Jesus, he was arguing with them that you have changed the word of God. God said, honor thy mother and father, but you guys are telling them to say Corban, which is, I don't have to do anything else for you. Anything I do, consider that a gift, but I'm not required. So, and, to death, it doesn't, only mean, dying physically. But, it's the disregard, lack of consideration, the disrespect. We have a battle for power here. And like I said, there's something, really serious happening in the minds, for them to be okay with something like this. Remember, he's speaking of a future event, and we are, approaching onto this, looking at the decline in morality. Imagine when it will be like, less than a year before the return of Savior, how morality will be. So here we see, really crossing of lines that should never, ever, ever even be approached onto. Brother betraying a brother to death. I mean, we grew up, the father, the son. I gave birth, I gave life to you. The children, the parents, I took care of you. At what point, did we get here? It's like there's no boundaries left in life. A boundary says that, listen, we can argue all day. But see, the second we feel like putting our hands on each other, that's when we know we've gone too far. We can disagree all day, but when we start cursing at each other, we know that, at that point, we need to slow down a bit. There's no boundaries nowhere. The Bible said in the last days, men shall run to and fro and knowledge shall increase. And if you look at, the progression of little children, they're born knowing all these things that, kids of old did not. If you look at little children now, they're born knowing these things. I really believe that God, He's, accelerating things to give in each man opportunity to choose or to refuse Him. And since we're so close to the end, the only way this can be done is by increasing their intelligence. Literally, I see little kids being born. It's like, how did you know this? Where you get this from? They're born knowing these things, or they develop and they mature so quickly. Things that took us into our teenage years, they're already talking about. Wanting to ask questions about. And the answer, I believe, is because remember, the gospel has to be preached in all four corners of the earth before the end shall come. Every man has to make his choice. So these ones, they're on a quicker, more accelerated development to be in a state of mind where they can, decide for themselves. You shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end, the same shall be saved. We really see a distinction between the followers of Jesus Christ versus the world. There's such a great distinction. I've never seen a group of people be hated as much as the Christians. To be a person of faith, whatever religion you might be, that comes with a certain, expectation that some people are not going to like you just because you believe in something of faith. That's a given for all religions. But even within religions themselves, it seems as if the Christians, the believers of Christ, they get the short end of the stick. They're the ones that's picked on. I had a realization one day. I've seen Muslims block Christians from entering their churches, their places of worship. I've seen Muslims use violence against Christians. I've never seen Christians blocking Muslims from entering their place of worship. Ever. Nowhere in history. No time, no place, no how. The most you'll get is just words. Telling you that, hey, Allah is wrong. Muhammad is a liar. It's Jesus Christ that is where it's at. So, innately being the children of truth, the children of the light, the real, believers. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. The devil, he knows that, Christianity, following Jesus Christ is the only way to go. And he'll use these other people. It's one thing we have to admit and accept. We have to admit and accept that you're not going anywhere without Jesus Christ. Can I put that out there? Can I say that? You're not going anywhere without Jesus Christ. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. I wrestle with the idea or the concept that what if a person was like maybe a Muslim and they lived, so holy and so good, and they were devout in their faith. They prayed, believing that they were praying to the right God, and they didn't cause any trouble. They were helpful as they could be, and even doing the things that that Jesus himself would be proud of. But just one thing that not confessing the name Jesus. Would there be even a slight exception allowed for people like this? But then I realized that it would be an exception, and you don't want to put your faith in the hand of chance. We see here, endure to the end. It's gonna be hard. Things are gonna happen that, listen, you're gonna have to be in a mindset to endure, being set apart, being called different, being picked on, even being physically, even violence against you in some instances, where it's literally gonna be enduring. I know life is not great, when it comes to how people receive me. But the truth is that this is the truth, and there's no other way. It is always said that the devil, he doesn't attack those that already belong to him. He's coming after you. There must be a reason. So no, you be it of all sake, of all men, for my name's sake. Understand that this is a coordinated, resistance, led by a being that thinks and reacts, that learns and grows and understands. This is not by chance. It didn't happen, accidentally, or just over a period of time. It just ended up being this way. No. This was started with the intention of this outcome. Being led by this creature, thought of conscience, of awareness, this creature that can think and make decisions, that can redirect, that can adjust its strategy, that's targeting these believers of God. If I say a creature of intelligence, I use that word loosely. Intelligence being just that you have a mind to think, that 1 plus 1 is 2. Because, to come against God is no intelligence in that. Because at the end of the day, he's going to win. And not only because he's going to win, but look at God. God is a kind of a friend. If he only had, one sandwich left in his fridge, he would give it to you. God is the kind of friend where, if you're, going through struggles, whether it be financially, he would maybe empty out his bank account just to help you get back on your feet, knowing that you would pay him back, hopefully or expectantly later, right? God is the kind of guy, the person that he is, to want to come against him. What does that say about you? We look at the devil and we know that he does evil. But, did you ever stop to think about the kind of person he must be? Come against somebody that's so good and be so, relentless. God is the kind of friend, if you were like stuck on a sinking ship and there was one life raft left and only one person could fit on it, he would give it to you. Why would anyone want to come against somebody like that? Would anybody have anything bad to say about somebody like that? Would anybody? But when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the place where it ought not, let him that readeth understand, and let him that is in Judea flee into the mountains. So the abomination of desolation, we know Daniel, he gave, many prophecies. He gave the prophecy of that huge, individual, that being that, like, the different body parts were made of different metals. Like the head was made of one, maybe, brass. The chest was made of, maybe silver. The arms of gold. It was just, these aren't the correct order of things, but, every part was made of something different. The abomination of desolation, Jesus, he just gave them, like, what led us here was they commented on the temple. Maybe that's why he used this example. When they said, see us what manner of stones these are, and how great these buildings are. Then he said, you see us all these great buildings, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And I hear he is saying the abomination of desolation. That's when the temple, it would be destroyed. Because, at that point, we entered, this era. This era being all out war and anything goes. It's all out war against the people of God and anything goes. It's just that over time, they've been getting more creative, with the things that they use. When they just started out, they could do only the best that they could, right? The knowledge that they had to cause damage. But then, as men sit down and reason, as men try new things and see the effect, as men combine different, methods together, as men make, methods evolve, out of what they were initially. As things evolved, as things developed, and it took on a mind of its own, it got worse to the point that we're seeing today. It's like a race, and that was a starting gun. And it's a sprint. It's not a marathon. So they're running. When they just start, they're running, but they're not going to be as fast as when they get to the middle of the race or even towards the end when they start picking up real speed. So in those days, it was a slower speed. So the abomination of desolation refers to desolation, desolating something. I did a little reading on this before, and it was the best answer I found was that what was done by the Romans, the Roman army, and it was, I believe, AD 70. So let him that is in Judea flee into the mountains. And like I said, it's all out war and anything goes. What is the mountains? What does that represent? It's a place of safety where maybe there's not much civilization up there, not much men, not many policy makers or soldiers, enforcing bodies of law. But it's a place of nature where you live off the land, everything is quiet, and you're supposed to be safe there because you're away from the action, you're away from the leaders, the bureaucrats and the diplomats that's causing and calling for these things. So what is Judea? Judea is a place of like civilization, right? It's a place where business is conducted. Laws are enforced, laws are passed. We have leaders, we have rulers, we have followers. When these things start infiltrating the land, they start infiltrating the government. It's not just only now a bunch of radicals, believing a certain thing, but it actually becomes a law of the land. So this is leaving the land to find safety in a place where technically it's still part of the land, but it's somehow different. Because people, they're not going to come up there to harass you with anything. Into the mountains, that implies, escaping, what shall be happening. Let not him that is on the rooftop go down into the house, neither enter therein, neither take anything from the house. This kind of implies, Lot's wife, I would like to say. Is going out, not looking back. If you look back, you might not make it. We know that she looked back, she was turned into a pillar of salt. But you being so close, you're actually on the rooftop and you're still not allowed, you still might not have enough time to go into the house to get anything. This implies a period of survival. We gotta survive. It's not so much, comfort of life or amenities. How close is the roof to being going inside or not even taking anything? This has a physical meaning. It also has a metaphorical meaning also. I see this as, the metaphorical meaning, I would say, it's almost like, you're leaving to just hold on, to the Lord himself. Nothing else matters. We're not debating anything else, but holding on to faith. Lest we slip, lest in our debate we get convinced of something and that affects us down the line. So we're holding on to our belief, our faith. We're not looking around for anything else because we know everything is coming to, deceive. Everything is coming to destroy and lead us astray. And I don't know. I'm gonna give myself the credit and say maybe I'm not that smart. And because I'm not that smart, maybe I just hold on. And that's all I do. I hold on. I don't have. I'm not gonna try and argue with you. You might outsmart me. At the end of the day, I lose what I believe in. Let not him that is on the roof go down into the house, neither enter therein, neither take anything from the house. To take something from the house, it implies, comfort. That's your nice bed, your hot water, your oven to bake your food. You ever been, maybe you were doing something in your life. You were either something for work, for school. It was an important project and you didn't spend much time at the house. Or even if you did, you were there but you weren't really there. You didn't even have time to make yourself food. You maybe didn't even have time to shower. It was so urgent and it was so big. It's kind of get that feeling from this, this line of text. Not returning to take anything from the house. It's like there's something going on that needs your attention, and you're worried about the wrong thing if that's what is on your mind. There's something going on that needs your urgent attention, just like this project I'm trying to describe. And if you're thinking about, going to get something from the house, then you're missing, seriousness and the urgency of what's going on. Let not him that is in the field return to get his garment, wanting to continue in the way that, we have known life to be, not realizing that we're transitioning out, that it's time to move forward, and it won't be long. Like I keep seeing Lot's wife, looking back at your way of life that you used to have, the things you used to have. But woe to them that be with child and those that give suck in those days. Now, if taking care of our infant, all these things, they have physical as well as, metaphorical meanings. When I say physical, I mean literal. To have a literal child, you know that they have so many needs. Imagine having to survive, the dreadfulness of this lawless, anarchy. while tending to a newborn, you not having the food to give it, things being so unstable, the unrest, while you have to provide you have to provide rest and comfort unto this child in such a great state of unrest and discomfort. The metaphorical meaning, what is it to be with child and to give suck? That implies newness, right? I don't know, maybe you are new to this thing, or you're a new leader, to give suck unto newborn believers while, watching them, go through these things, them being new to the faith, expecting that, God, He's just gonna take care of everything and everything's gonna be calm and all right. Watching them, react to these things, which a lot of them will receive it, but how many, will it will just overwhelm them and say, "This is not what I signed up for. This is not worth it." How many of them will turn back? A lot of them will go forward. But what about the ones that will turn back? Woe unto them that are with child and those that give suck. Even you being a new believer yourself, being a child, receiving suck, pray that your flight be not in the winter, because, all these things going on, everything is uncertain. It just said, if we be in Judea, flee to the mountain. Not that him that is in the field return to get his garment. A garment, it keeps you warm, right? The winter, that's cold. No, I'm not. I don't know if it snows or gets as cold over, in the land of Israel as it does here in certain parts of America. I'm in New York, so it gets really cold here during the winter. I know in Jamaica, where I'm from, a winter in Jamaica, I mean, it's still warm. It's like in the what 70s. If it gets to like 65, then that's like a miracle. It's always warm, but the winter, it implies another, degree of uncertainty and difficulty, caused by nature itself, and not so much by the policy of men, the efforts of this thinking, reasoning, being that has a will. It strategizes, it plans, it adjusts, it makes course corrections. It goes back to the drawing board and comes back with plan B. We're adding now something to land itself. The winter could also be like, even, anything that's unfortunate, like a recession, a drought, famine. A drought is a lack of water, a famine is a lack of food, right? It's anything that is the land or the environment that's adding. Things are already bad enough, but now we also have to deal with this. I'm Straw Greenhorn.